Good afternoon to you. Mark's out of HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane Pro and HD video blog for Monday, July 25th, 2016. In the Atlantic Basin this afternoon, not a lot happening. Still a lot of stable air sitting out here across the deep tropics. Little surface trough, area of low pressure, weak as it may be, creating a little convective activity here in the Gulf of Mexico. This should generally drift towards the coast over time, bringing some heavy rainfall potential to parts of Texas and Louisiana. Very, very low chance of development just because this is there over very warm water. Certainly keep an eye on it, but none of the computer models indicating much happening with it. Off the coast of Africa, a little bit of a monsoon trough trying to develop here. Generally still stable atmosphere out this way, although more convective activity developing over northwest Africa. You see that the intertropical convergence zone and areas along the equator pretty busy with showers and thunderstorms. Still maybe a couple of weeks away from this really starting to fire up. But once we get into August, I do believe this will start to get a lot busier, and we better be ready for it, that's for sure. Interesting little change of pace here. I wanted to show you this tropical analysis and forecast branch surface map. Here's the southeast coast. There's Florida, for example, Cuba, etc. Here's the west coast of Africa over here. And you can see that monsoon trough setting up off the coast of Africa, weak tropical waves dotting the Atlantic. This is a surface trough right here. And then we have our little area of low pressure and the surface trough associated with it over the Gulf. But overall, pressures are still maybe just a little higher than they should be through parts of the basin, maybe a little bit lower out here. Just not quite where things need to be yet, but that's, typical for this part of July. Usually things aren't that busy in the Atlantic Basin. Give it another month, and I think that will change. In the Eastern Pacific, things are starting to calm down just a little bit. We have Georgette, which is weakening, and it'll continue to move on out over the open Pacific. Frank, which never really amounted to too much over here, also going to die out over the Pacific. You can see that on a wide shot satellite picture. There's Georgette there, there's Frank, and really nothing else coming together to the south and east over the southeast Pacific here. This, by the way, the leftovers of Darby, which made landfall on the big island of Hawaii, moving through the area, kind of slow and painstaking. Residual moisture in the area brought some heavy rain to the Hawaiian island chain over the last couple of days, but it certainly wasn't the same impact, obviously, as a hurricane would be. I mean, typically, you got to have a hurricane coming in from the south, and then it turns back across the islands to give them a really strong hit. Think about Hurricane Iniki in 1992. But, these storms that come in from the east typically run into the big island. The local sort of microclimate effect of these volcanic peaks sticking up out here disrupt the circulation, wring a lot of the moisture out from orographic lift, where the clouds run into the mountains and they get lifted up. And it also chews up that low-level circulation too. Very disruptive. Nevertheless, Darby bringing some heavy rain to the Hawaiian Islands, but that'll be moving on out. In the Eastern Pacific, with all that activity, we have eroded some of the sea surface temperature anomalies down to near normal or just a little bit below through that little alleyway. You can also see the developing La Nina conditions trying to get going with this otherwise warm PDO, or Pacific Decadal Oscillation. Fancy way of saying that sometimes the Pacific overall is warmer than it should be, and sort of down the middle of it here along the equator. Last year, of course, we had that strong El Nino. This year, colder than it should be. La Nina type conditions. And by the way, it takes several months of this to kind of hang around before it's officially called La Nina, so we'll see what happens over August, September, and October. Meanwhile, in the Atlantic Basin, a pretty defined curve here, sort of a crescent shape of warm anomalies to the west of Africa and the Iberian Peninsula here, Portugal and Spain, and kind of different than what we've seen the last few years. This much warmer than we have seen lately, colder in the middle of the Atlantic, which is normally what we see, and then very, very warm compared to average over here in the western Atlantic, setting up for a very busy time, perhaps in August and September. Actual sea surface temperatures, if you are in the tidewater of Virginia all the way down south and west and whatnot from there, boy, the beach water temperatures are about as warm as you're ever going to see. Mid to upper 80s in some cases, and that warm water very prevalent here just off the mid-Atlantic states. In fact, the 26 degrees Celsius isotherm, which is roughly 79 degrees Fahrenheit, extends up that far north right there. Everything I've drawn, I'm going back over it in this yellow highlighter, all of that is warm enough for hurricane activity not too far south of New England. So we'll see. August and September are going to be very interesting. Gulf of Mexico always warm enough to support activity on the severe side. You can get some big hurricanes in here pretty much any year as long as the atmosphere cooperates. Of course, it's been a while. A lot of it has been made coming up on the longest stretch of no hurricanes in the Gulf in over 130 years. Will that change in the coming weeks? We'll just have to wait and see. I certainly hope people are ready because the water temperatures in here, and that includes this upper ocean heat content, that's what this map shows. Anything on the higher end of the scale is a lot more energy for storms and hurricanes to take advantage of, and we can see that is very prevalent here in the western basin, including the Gulf of Mexico. Nothing brewing out there right now, but I think once we get into August, especially mid-August on, and that only makes sense. It's not like I'm some genius for figuring that out. That's climatology. It's supposed to be busy from about August 15th until the end of October, and that's when I would expect things to change for this year, especially once and assuming that the hurricane activity in the eastern Pacific starts to wane a little bit, then maybe the upward motion and the energy can focus in the Atlantic. We shall see. Never a guarantee. You never know about these things. It's kind of like a free throw shooter in basketball. They make 90% of their shots. They got 3 shots coming because they were fouled on a 3-point attempt. And they make the first 2. You figure they're going to hit the third, but maybe they don't. Maybe they miss all 3. You just never know. Hurricanes and basketball, there's your analogy for today. But really, though, be prepared this season, all right? Those warm temperatures out there in the Atlantic, that got me a little concerned more so than usual. A lot more energy available for some intense hurricanes. You don't have to have a huge season with all these storms and hurricanes out there to make it impactful on you. We could just have 2 or 3 hurricanes form, and it could be very problematic. So you got to answer that iPhone, I guess. We shall see. So really do be prepared, all right? The best advice I can give you, at least think about what you're going to do if one comes your way. And it's going to be a little while. Nothing in the near term, that's for sure. All right? Well, that's it from me for today. Again, I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. That's my website. And, of course, for Hurricane Pro in HD, have a good rest of your week. Unless something pops up, I'll talk to you again next Monday.